Unicoin locked out of GSuite for 4 days. Leaked environment variables leads to extortion. Windows driver 0-day used to install rootkit. 15,000 AWS apps vulnerable to ALBeast attacks. Qilin stealing Chrome credentials. Velvet Ant targets Cisco Nexus switches. Last month's PHP vulnerability used to create backdoors. Critical vulnerability exploited in Lightspeed cache plugin. Mandiant talks about an AKS privilege escalation. An update on National Public Data's data leak. All this and more in today's episode of the Cybersecurity Digest. Hello and welcome back to the Cybersecurity Digest, where our goal is to help you stay informed so you can stay secure. Today is Monday, August 26th, 2024. We are finally back after a few weeks of a break to get the Cybersecurity Digest newsletter started. If you haven't already, I highly suggest you check it out, as it is all the content from this show and more delivered straight to your inbox for the low price of free $99. To check it out, you can head to thecybersecuritydigest.tech to subscribe. To the first-time listeners, welcome, and to my return listeners, welcome back. As always, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to check out the show. If these episodes help you stay informed, I would greatly appreciate it if you would please share this show out with a colleague or someone you know who likes staying up to date on the latest cybersecurity news. Just as a reminder, the format of the show has changed a little bit with the launch of the newsletter. The show is now a look back at the top 10 news stories or research from this past week. In this new format, I will briefly provide you with an overview of the patches that came out, as well as briefly touch on the CISA Corner. Alright, without further delay, let's go ahead and dive into our top 10 stories from this past week. Alright, on to our news segment, the top 10 highlights from this past week. The format for this section is going to be a look at the 10 most impactful stories or research that was released in the past week. This is in no particular order. If you would like more stories, you can catch the comprehensive list in our newsletter. Additionally, in the newsletter, there are comments, so if there is a particular story that you feel should be in the top 10, please comment on the newsletter page. I would greatly appreciate that engagement, and also it would help me understand what stories you truly value. Alright, without further ado, let's dive on in. First up in our top 10 stories from this past week is a story that comes from the folks over at Recorded Future. Earlier this past week, they discussed a significant cybersecurity incident involving Unicoin, a prominent cryptocurrency company. On August 9th, 2024, a hacker gained access to Unicoin's Google GSuite account, locking all employees out of their email and other GSuite services for nearly 4 days. By August 13th, the company managed to regain control of their accounts, but the incident left traces of compromised personal data and hacked messages, particularly affecting the accounting department. The company is still investigating the full impact of the breach and has not yet determined if there will be any financial repercussions. One notable aspect of the investigation revealed that a contractor had forged their identity, leading to their termination. This incident highlights a broader issue with the tech industry, where North Korean hackers and threat actors have been known to infiltrate companies by posing as legitimate employees. The US government has repeatedly warned about this tactic, which aims to either siphon funds back to North Korea or facilitate further cyber attacks. This was a recent social engineering attack that we had seen as well with the company KnowBe4. Recorded Future also mentioned that Unicoin is one of the few cryptocurrency companies that reports to the SEC, with its coin backed by a diverse portfolio of assets including real estate and equity in other companies. Despite the breach, there is no evidence that any digital assets were stolen. However, the discovery of discrepancies in employee and contractor data raises concerns about potential internal vulnerabilities and the need for robust cybersecurity measures. In a related development, the article notes that the first half of 2024 saw nearly $1.6 billion stolen through attacks of cryptocurrency companies, with North Korean threat actors being the primary culprits. This statistic provided by blockchain security company Chainalysis highlights the scale and persistence of cyber threats targeting the cryptocurrency sector. The United Nations is also investigating numerous cyber attacks allegedly conducted by North Korean hackers, further emphasizing the global nature of this issue. Due to the amount of sanctions that the nation faces, malicious cyber attacks are one of the nation's chief sources of income. Overall, the Unicoin incident serves as a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities that even well-established companies face in the digital age. It is also very important that you review these types of incidents within your company's hiring authorities so that they're aware of these types of issues going on so they can take preventative measures. Unit 42 this past week discussed a sophisticated extortion campaign that compromised multiple organizations by exploiting exposed environment variable files .env files containing sensitive credentials. The attackers set up their infrastructure within various organizations' AWS environments and scanned over 230 million unique targets for sensitive information. They targeted 110,000 domains, resulting in the exposure of over 90,000 unique variables, including 7,000 related to cloud services and 1,500 linked to social media accounts. The attackers used automation techniques to operate efficiently, indicating their advanced knowledge of cloud architectural processes. The campaign's success relied on misconfigurations in victim organizations that inadvertently exposed their .env files rather than vulnerabilities in cloud provider services. Attackers gained initial access through these exposed files, which often contained hard-coded provider access keys, SaaS API keys, and database login information. They performed various discovery operations using AWS API calls to gather information about the environment and identify services to exploit. The attackers escalated their privileges by creating new identity and access management roles with administrative permissions, allowing them to gain unfettered access to the compromised environments. The threat actors attempted to create new infrastructure stacks using Amazon EC2 and AWS Lambda. While their EC2 operations failed due to limited permissions, they successfully created multiple Lambda functions for automated scanning. The malicious Lambda function scanned the internet for domains with exposed .env files, retrieved clear text credentials, and stored them in a threat actor-controlled S3 bucket. The attackers specifically targeted mailgun credentials to send phishing attacks from legitimate domains, increasing the likelihood of bypassing security protections. Overall, this article from Unit 42 emphasizes the importance of following cloud security best practices to prevent such attacks. Organizations should avoid exposing environmental files publicly, using identity and access management roles instead of long-term access keys, as well as follow the principle of least privilege when provisioning permissions. Enabling logging and monitoring processes such as CloudTrail and VPC flow logs is crucial for detecting and responding to malicious activities. The article from Unit 42 concludes by highlighting the need for organizations to establish proper logging and retention policies to maintain visibility into their cloud environments, as well as protect against future threats. Bleeping Computer published an article that discusses a significant cybersecurity incident involving the North Korean Lazarus hacking group. The Lazarus group was observed exploiting a zero-day vulnerability in the Windows AFD.sys driver. This flaw, identified as CVE 2024-38193, was used to elevate privileges and install the FUD module rootkit on targeted systems. Microsoft addressed this vulnerability in its August 2024 Patch Tuesday update, along with 7 other zero-day vulnerabilities. The AFD.sys driver, a crucial component of the Windows kernel for the WinSock protocol, was exploited by the Lazarus group to gain unauthorized access to sensitive system areas and evade detection by disabling Windows monitoring features. The vulnerability was discovered by researchers from Gen Digital, who noted that the Lazarus Group used a Bring Your Own Vulnerable Driver or BYOVD attack method. This method involves installing drivers with known vulnerabilities on targeted machines to gain kernel-level privileges. The AFD.sys driver being installed by default on all Windows devices made this attack particularly dangerous as it did not require the installation of older, easily detectable drivers. The Lazarus Group has previously used similar methods with other drivers such as appid.sys and Dell dbutil_2_3.sys to install the FUD module rootkit. In the article, Bleeping Computer also highlights a related campaign in Brazil where North Korean hackers identified as Pukchong UNC 4899 targeted cryptocurrency professionals with fake job opportunities. The attackers used social media to send benign PDFs containing job descriptions and skills questionnaires, which eventually led to the installation of a Trojanized Python app. This app was designed to retrieve cryptocurrency prices but was modified to connect to an attacker-controlled domain to download a second-stage payload under specific conditions. The Lazarus Group is notorious for targeting financial and cryptocurrency firms, conducting multi-million-dollar cyber heists to fund North Korean government's weapons and cyber programs. If you'd like to read more about this group as well as these particular attacks, I highly suggest that you check the link in the show notes for the full article from Bleeping Computer. Alright, moving right along here. Also this week, Security Week reported on the ALBeast vulnerability discovered by Migo Research, which poses a significant threat to applications using AWS Application Load Balancer. The vulnerability allows attackers to exploit ALB to bypass authentication and authorization by forging tokens. This is achieved by creating an ALB instance, signing a token, and altering the ALB configuration to match the victim's expected issuer. AWS has stated that this issue falls under the shared responsibility model, meaning customers must ensure their configurations are secure. To mitigate the risk of ALBeast, Migo Research recommends following updated AWS configuration requirements. The shared responsibility model divides security tasks between cloud providers and customers, often leading to confusion about where responsibilities lie. AWS emphasizes that customers must update their applications to comply with the new documentation to avoid vulnerabilities. The article highlights the challenges of securing modern applications, especially those using microservice architecture. This architecture delegates many functions to third-party services, which can introduce new security risks. Security teams must ensure all functionalities are correctly implemented across applications to reduce errors and inconsistencies, which can lead to significant security threats. If you and your organization are using these types of resources, this is a good reminder to review those and see if you have any updates available. Alright, on to a ransomware threat actor, Qilin. Qilin has been observed by Sophos as stealing Google Chrome credentials. Let's talk a little bit about that here. Sophos published this week research that discusses a recent investigation by their XOps team into a Qilin ransomware breach, revealing a novel credential harvesting technique. The attackers exploited Google Chrome browsers to steal credentials from a subset of the network's endpoints. This method, observed in July 2024, involved editing the default domain policy on a domain controller to introduce a logon-based GPO or group policy object. This GPO executed a PowerShell script, ipsscanner.ps1, which harvested credential data stored in Chrome browsers. The credentials were then exfiltrated and the evidence was deleted before the attackers encrypted the files and dropped a ransom note. The Qilin ransomware group, active for over 2 years now, has previously employed double extortion tactics, stealing data and encrypting systems before demanding a ransom. In this case, the attackers gained initial access through compromised credentials, exploiting a VPN portal that lacked MFA. The dwell time between initial access and further movement was 18 days, suggesting the possible involvement of an initial access broker or IAB. The attackers then moved laterally to a domain controller where they implemented the credential harvesting GPO. The full article highlights the broader implications of this attack, noting that the harvested credentials could be used to compromise other organizations. The use of a logon GPO meant that each user logging into the network unknowingly triggered the credential harvesting script. This attack underscores the importance of using password managers and MFA to protect against such threats. The Qilin ransomware group's innovative credential harvesting technique represents a significant evolution in ransomware tactics. If you would like to read more so you and your organization can stay up to date on these, please check out the link in the show notes. Last week, researchers from Cygnia detailed the activities of a China Nexus threat group known as Velvet Ant. Velvet Ant has been observed leveraging a zero-day exploit tracked as CVE 2024-20399 on Cisco switch appliances to maintain long-term network persistence. This group has been active for over 3 years, gradually infiltrating various systems and evading detection by shifting their operations to legacy Windows systems and network devices like F5 Big IP appliances. Recently, they transitioned to exploiting Cisco Nexus switch appliances using a zero-day vulnerability to access the underlying Linux layer and install their malware named Velvet Shell. Cygnia notes that Velvet Ant's tactics are sophisticated and stealthy. They use the command injection vulnerability in the Cisco NX OS software command line interface to bypass the restrictive application layer and gain unauthorized access to the underlying Linux OS level. This allowed them to execute malicious scripts and manipulate the system beyond the intended administrative capabilities. The attackers deployed the Velvet Shell malware, which is a hybrid of 2 open-source tools, Tiny Shell and 3Proxy. This malware provided extensive control over the compromised system, enabling data exfiltration and persistent access. During a recent intrusion, Cygnia detected suspicious activities on a Cisco switch appliance, prompting a deeper investigation. The threat actor was observed performing reconnaissance activities, including issuing extended ping commands and mapping routing paths across various VRFs. They also used base64 encoded commands to execute a malicious script, which loaded and executed a backdoor binary on the device. The attackers meticulously removed traces of their actions to avoid detection, but Cygnia was able to reconstruct the Velvet Shell malware from the device's memory. This was quite an astonishing read, and if you would like to read the full article, you can find Cygnia's full write-up as well as IOC's linked in the show notes. Blooping Computer published an article this past week that discusses a newly discovered backdoor named MS-UpEdge that had been deployed on a university's Windows system in Taiwan. This backdoor was likely introduced by exploiting a recently patched PHP remote code execution vulnerability CVE 2024-4577. This critical flaw affects PHP installations running in CGI mode on Windows systems, allowing unauthenticated attackers to execute arbitrary code and potentially compromise the entire system. The attackers used 2 DLL libraries, weblog.dll and wimicint.dll, with the former being loaded by the Apache process httpd.exe. A notable feature of MS-UpEdge is its use of DNS traffic to communicate with its command and control server, a technique not commonly observed in the wild. This method leverages DNS tunneling based on the open source tool DNSCat to encapsulate data within DNS queries and responses, enabling the backdoor to receive commands from its command and control server. Symantec's Threat Hunter team, which investigated this incident, believes the attackers gained access by exploiting that PHP vulnerability. This flaw bypasses protections implemented from a previous vulnerability, CVE 2012-1823, which was exploited in past malware attacks. Despite multiple threat actors scanning for vulnerable systems, Symantec has not yet attributed the attack to any specific group or identified the motive behind it. The article also highlights the rapid exploitation of the vulnerability. A day after the PHP maintainers released patches for CVE 2024-4577, proof of concept exploit code was released and exploitation attempts were observed on honeypots. Within 48 hours, the Tell You the Pass ransomware gang began exploiting the vulnerability to deploy web shells and encrypt victims' systems. This swift exploitation underscores the importance of staying informed so you and your organizations can act quickly to fix and resolve these vulnerabilities. In another Bleeping Computer article, this past week they discussed a critical vulnerability in the Lightspeed Cache WordPress plugin, which had a vulnerability identified as CVE 2024-28000. This vulnerability allows attackers to escalate privileges without authentication, affecting all versions up to 6.3.0.1. The issue arises from a weak hash check in the plugin's user simulation feature, which can be exploited through brute force to create rogue admin accounts. This could lead to a complete takeover of affected websites, enabling the installation of malicious plugins, altering critical settings, redirecting traffic to malicious sites, and stealing user data. Rafi Muhammad from PatchStack detailed the exploitation method, demonstrating how to brute force the hash to escalate privileges and create a new administrator account via the REST API. His method showed that cycling through all 1 million possible security hash values at 3 requests per second could gain site access in as little as a few hours, all the way to a week. This vulnerability poses a significant risk given that Lightspeed Cache is used by over 5 million sites, with only about 30% running a safe version of the plugin. WordPress security firm WordFence reported detecting and blocking over 48,500 attacks targeting CVE 2024-28000 within 24 hours. This indicates intense exploitation activity, as well as all the things that we've talked about in the past with needing to be very rapid in your response in patching these vulnerabilities. WordFence had previously warned about the likelihood of active exploitation for this vulnerability. This incident marks the second time this year that Lightspeed Cache has been targeted, following a cross-site scripting flaw back in May that also led to rogue administrator accounts and website takeovers. Users of Lightspeed Cache are strongly advised to upgrade to the latest version of 6.4.1 or uninstall the plugin to mitigate the risk. Mandiant recently disclosed to Microsoft an AKS privilege escalation vulnerability. The issue affected Azure Kubernetes Services clusters using Azure CNI for network configuration and Azure for network policy. An attacker with command execution in a pod within an affected cluster could escalate privileges, access credentials, and read all secrets within the cluster. Microsoft has since fixed the underlying issue. Mandiant's research gets really in-depth, and I would suggest that if this is something that you are interested in, that you just check out their full research in the show notes. If you listen to this show, you like to stay up to date on the latest cybersecurity news, so I'm sure you're already familiar with the speculation that was going around about the quote-unquote largest hack ever of 2.7 billion individuals. Well, recently, the National Public Data, in a filing with Maine's Attorney General, listed that number of affected individuals actually at 1.3 million impacted individuals. So that is great that it is not 2.7. It is still unfortunate that 1.3 million individuals were impacted. One of the best things that you can do to prevent these types of identity theft, or, if you are concerned about your social security number being stolen, I highly suggest look at one of those credit monitoring services that are out there. All right, and that is going to wrap up our top 10 stories from this past week. In order to keep with our show's tradition, it is now time to move on to our next section of the show, Prevalent Patches. Welcome to our new Prevalent Patches section. To save time on the show and keep the show in a more condensed format, what I'm going to be doing here for the patches is listing the products that received patches over the past week. If you would like to read more about these patches, they will be linked in the show notes for your convenience. This past week, the following devices received patches: Avanti Virtual Traffic Manager, Avalanche, and Neurons for ITSM. F5 published patches for Big IP, Nginx plus MQTT, and Big IP MPTCP. Intel fixed 13 CVEs. Dell published an update for its digital delivery and Dell Support Assist products. Ingress published an update for its Nginx. SAP published their August security fixes, which resolved several vulnerabilities. SolarWinds published a fix for a critical vulnerability in its Web Help Desk product. Zoom published a fix for 2 different CVEs. Atlassian published a fix for Jira. GiveWP WordPress plugin received a notable CVSS score of 10 out of 10 and did have a patch for that critical vulnerability. Manage Engine published an update for OP Manager. Cisco Unified Communications Manager and Cisco Identity Service Engine both received updates. Google Chrome also received another update. GitHub Enterprise Server received updates for several different versions. And lastly, FFmpeg received an update as well. If you would like to see more about these specific patches, please check the show notes where you can read more about these. On to our last segment of the show, our CISA Corner. CISA added 5 new vulnerabilities to its known exploited vulnerability catalog. These vulnerabilities were for the following products: Jenkins CLI, Dahua IP camera, Linux kernel, and Microsoft Exchange server. CISA also published 1 ICS advisory that were for the following products: Rockwell Automation Emulate 3D, Rockwell Automation 5015-AEN-FTXT, Mobotix P3 and MX6 cameras, Avtech Outpost 0810, and lastly, Mitsubishi Electric MEL SEC IQ-R Series Update D. If you'd like to check out everything here in the CISA Corner, the notes for it are going to be linked in the show notes below. All right, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Cybersecurity Digest podcast. I hope you enjoyed the new format. All links to the stories and research mentioned are in the show notes. For the full list of patches and CISA advisories, you can find the full list on our new website at www.thecybersecuritydigest.tech, which is also linked in the show notes. While there, check out our newsletter and consider subscribing so you can stay up to date on the latest cybersecurity news. I have also turned on comments on the website, so feel free to leave feedback for the show there. I would love to hear from you regarding the new format. If you like this episode, please consider sharing with someone you know who would also like this show. Lastly, I would greatly appreciate it if you could leave this show a rating in your podcast platform of choice. Thank you all again so much for your support. It truly makes a difference and really keeps me motivated to keep doing this. So thank you all again so much for your support over the last few weeks and with these upcoming episodes. Before you start your work week, here is your dad joke. Lance isn't a common name anymore, but in medieval times, people were named Lance a lot. All right, everyone. Until next time, stay informed to stay secure.